Good morning. My name is Guy Baroan with Baroan Technologies out of Elmwood Park, New Jersey. Today we're going to look at and discuss a case study where a high volume distributor that's been in business for over 100 years and has approximately 35 employees migrated away from AWS, a cloud infrastructure option, to Microsoft's Azure, a different cloud infrastructure option. Now, you might ask yourself, why would one company move from AWS to a Microsoft Azure if they're both in the cloud? Why not just stay with one versus the other? And those are great questions. And what we'll do is we'll look at what the one option was compared to the other, and why it made sense to consider moving from AWS to Microsoft Azure. If you're not familiar with what Microsoft AW with if you're not familiar with what AWS is, that's Amazon's Web Services. That's the Amazon service that allows companies that want to leverage what people consider a public cloud, the capability to host virtual servers in their environment. AWS, offered by Amazon, has been around for many years and is considered to be the best solution for many organizations. In fact, many companies have leveraged AWS in the infrastructure from very early on, not even bringing in local servers. So it's been a tremendous success for Amazon and is consistently growing and has a very large market share overall. Microsoft, in comparison, has a platform called Azure, and that's their option that's similar to AWS. That's where Microsoft offers database and hosting capabilities to clients that want to leverage the Microsoft technology stack of options and be able to work with it. Why would somebody want to move from a company like AWS from Amazon to Microsoft Azure, and what are the reasons? So in this particular case, Microsoft was not as early on an adapter or the company that offered the best option early on. That was Amazon. Amazon has been in the server hosting infrastructure as a service space for many, many years. And they were very early adopters, and a lot of companies leveraged their technologies, and it was really good. Because of the early adoption, some of the other companies saw the success that Amazon was having, and they figured that they needed to get into this as well, one of those being Microsoft. So when Microsoft came out with their offering similar to Amazon, they were not quite as polished early on as they are today. And so over the years, Microsoft did what Microsoft typically does best, and that is come in second to the game, but invest so much money and resources that they become the industry standard and they take over the industry because of the dominance that they show and the capabilities that they add into those products. So good for the consumers because you now have competing products from Amazon and AWS and Microsoft's Azure, which are both amazing options for companies to consider. In this particular case, however, there were some areas of services that our client was looking for that AWS did not offer that Microsoft's Azure did. And so that's what we're going to talk about when we look at the case study. So the client was migrated early on. They are an early adopter of the cloud technologies. And this client in particular, very high volume distributor, and they wanted to migrate all of their local servers and move them to the cloud environment. They did not want to have any hardware for the servers for their users to work with locally. And a lot of that had to do with every 3 to 5 years, you need to consider replacement of that hardware, ongoing costs for licensing, which you still need, but some of that is provided with the hosting costs at the infrastructure options that are offered by AWS and Microsoft. So the client had migrated all of their servers early on, and the best option at that time for them was Amazon Web Services. They successfully migrated 13 servers to Amazon and were very, very happy with the overall capabilities that they now had in that environment. Fast forward a few years, they were working in AWS and everything was fine. But then COVID hit in 2020. And when COVID hit, a lot of people needed to work from home. And the environment, the way it was configured, was very good and allowed their people to work from home very easily because they were, again, early adopters. So working from home was really no different than being in the office. So the shift from in the office to work from home for this particular client happened to be a very simple one because everybody was already configured to work in the Amazon Web Services, AWS environment from the get-go. So when COVID hit, everybody was able to work from home. The client was able to continue business as usual, um, obviously with the differences that COVID and the restrictions had, but for the most part, everything was business as usual. The one area that they wanted to be able to work on more was they wanted to leverage Microsoft Teams. This particular client was an early adopter of Microsoft Office 365. And now with the work from home, since people were not able to just get up away from their desks and move over to somebody else or go talk to them, they needed to leverage a video chat or collaboration tool like Microsoft Teams. In order to be able to do that, however, the capabilities that Microsoft Teams brought was really, especially early on, um, it was very local. So you couldn't really do the same amount of work within Teams in a remote environment that you could do local with your computer. So for this particular client, because they were leveraging Microsoft Teams and they wanted the capability to communicate more and more, Microsoft as an organization, when COVID hit, Microsoft Teams was not where it is today. And Microsoft quickly realized when the COVID restrictions came in, how critical Teams was to a lot of organizations. And they realized this because Zoom, a competing product to Microsoft Teams, was becoming very, very popular. And most companies leveraged Zoom. For Microsoft to not lose its share in the market with the video collaboration and the tool that it built out in Teams, Microsoft really ramped up the development of Teams and put a high focus on all the capabilities that people are leveraging in Microsoft Zoom, in Microsoft Teams. They wanted to be in line with what was being offered by Zoom. And so Microsoft really did a great job to bring all those capabilities out, and people loved Teams and they used it quite a bit. That, however, was not the case for people that were in a cloud environment or working on a remote desktop or terminal server environment. You could not run Microsoft Teams in an environment where people were connecting to a terminal server or RDS environment. And the reason is because in those environments, really the benefit of the environment is that the users are just streaming from a remote location that changes on the keyboard, the mouse clicks, and the screens. And so having audio and video in the remote environment, it was a little difficult to do with a remote desktop environment. That is because your camera is locally on your computer. And so you are connecting remotely to an environment. And so there had to be all sorts of capabilities with the technology to be able to allow the camera to redirect the image to the terminal server environment rather than coming from your desktop. So for very early on situations with Microsoft Teams, the best solution was to set up a camera on your computer and use Teams locally with the built-in microphone and speaker capabilities of your computers or laptops. In a remote environment, it was difficult to do that. This particular client was looking for a way, however, to not have to switch between the environment that they're in all day long when they wanted to have a Teams meeting, which was what was required of them. So for instance, if they had a Teams meeting, they would minimize their desktop to the remote server, and then they would work with teams. The owner requested that we come up with and find a solution for them to be able to leverage Microsoft Teams in the cloud environment. And the only option that was viable was considering moving to Microsoft Azure. And the reason being is Microsoft, over the course of a year and a half, while COVID restrictions were coming through, were doing a tremendous job at developing solutions for their clients to work with. One of those, it became known as the Azure Virtual Desktop. And the Azure Virtual Desktop allowed organizations a technology that was something Microsoft didn't really have before and they licensed previously. But now Microsoft had developed their own technology called Azure Virtual Desktop. And what that means is that with this technology, a company could leverage a virtual desktop environment in the cloud, in Microsoft's Azure environment, to be able to access all of their programs and all of their files for the company. So what that means is it didn't really make a difference what the users were connecting with. With the work from home environment, a lot of people, for instance, could not get a hold of computers. So they were required to use their computers from their homes to work on a company need or the company's work. When that came about, there were several issues that were caused. Some of them were security related. How could the organization protect the security, the integrity of the files and the data that they have if the computers that the people are connecting from are not ones that are managed or controlled by the organization? You don't know what the patching situation is. You don't know what the endpoint protection situation is. So it caused a lot of potential risks from a security perspective for the organizations. And so a lot of this was solved by the organizations offering a remote desktop option like Microsoft's Azure Virtual Desktop to allow users a secure environment to work within, regardless of how they connect, whether it's a tablet, a phone, a computer. It didn't really make a difference. The applications and the desktop were all installed in the Azure environment, which allowed the clients to protect their data, protect the access, and minimize the risk to their environment overall. The benefit, however, that Microsoft offered is with their Azure Virtual Desktop, they went a step beyond what just a remote desktop terminal server would do, which was the previous way that you would be able to do this. They wanted to offer and bring in the capabilities that people had to leverage some of the services that Office 365 brings them. For instance, Microsoft's Office 365 has a service called OneDrive for Business and SharePoint. And those services are excellent options for organizations to consider if they need access to their files. So OneDrive for Business could be used for organizations to consider replacing their My Documents folder and saving that to a file server in their office. Instead, with OneDrive for Business, the users can save these files, their My Documents, to the Office 365 environment and allow the users to get access to those files securely within the permissions that the company, the organization sets. And it's a great way for people to work. In fact, OneDrive for Business really became popular and gave a lot of organizations and users the capability to access their files in a very successful and easy way, which that grew that service overall and how people were using it. It became much more popular and much more leveraged as a service. The issues, however, was that the older technology, the remote desktop terminal server, you were not able to sync files in OneDrive for Business on a terminal server. And same thing happened with Teams. You couldn't use a Teams or a video chat with the terminal server. So those two capabilities were big issues for organizations that leverage the Office 365 platform. And Azure Virtual Desktop really solved those challenges. So by moving or by considering the Azure Virtual Desktop option, the clients could literally run Microsoft Teams in the Azure Virtual Desktop instance by using their local camera, video, and microphone, as well as speakers from their computer, but run it in the virtual environment, Azure Virtual Desktop. So that was an option that came out. And mind you, it is not a one for one option as far as the capabilities are concerned for Microsoft Teams. What I mean by that is you can't use Microsoft Teams locally on your desktop in the same manner that you can use for in Azure Virtual Desktop. There are still some capabilities that are still being worked on and will be probably capable of being leveraged in future releases of the Teams upgrades. But the most important option was the option for the people to be able to see the video chats that are going on. And that is one of the items that was available with Microsoft Azure. And so that capability was available. And then also the OneDrive for Business in the Azure Virtual Desktop. This was the first time now that you could literally have your OneDrive files replicated and synchronized in the Azure Virtual Desktop where they were previously not available or not able to do that in the remote desktop servers. So for those reasons, they were big enough benefits for our client to consider moving from Azure Virtual, from Amazon's web services to Microsoft Azure. So we had set up and configured replications of the images for the AWS servers and needed to migrate the environment over to Microsoft Azure. Now that's a painstaking process, but it was done with virtually no downtime for the client. We were able to bring in all of the services over from AWS as they were. We brought them over to Microsoft Azure in a parallel manner, meaning that in the background, servers were replicating and the environment was getting configured. We had several test users work and attempt to confirm that everything was going to work. And then we brought over the environment as it was from AWS to Microsoft Azure. That was the first phase. Once the environment was fully migrated and the environment had RDS in place, we then migrated the RDS users to an Azure Virtual Desktop environment. And we did that by setting up the new Azure Virtual Desktop environment, installing all their applications, and then working with the users to confirm that everything that they need to work on, all their applications, everything is functioning the way it's supposed to. And then once that was confirmed, we cut over from the RDS environment to Azure Virtual Desktop. And at that point, we worked with the clients to explain to them how they would be able to leverage Microsoft Teams now in the Azure Virtual Desktop environment, as well as OneDrive for Business, and not have to go back and forth between their applications any longer. So that was a very big win for our client. They were able to save a lot of time and a lot of confusion with their employees by not having to go back and forth with the uses. Some other benefits that the client reaped were there was a tighter integration because it was all Microsoft. Having a Microsoft Azure environment that the servers are hosted on and leveraging Office 365 allowed for a tighter integration between the users and the applications that they were working on. Some other benefits that they received was that they had a lower cost. So AWS and Azure are relatively comparable in cost. But when we brought in the Azure Virtual Desktop environment, that actually ended up being less of a cost for them because it allowed them to have more specific use cases for the servers, and they didn't need as many remote desktop servers for the functions that they had because Microsoft built in a lot of these capabilities. Some other software that was not great to run in an RDS environment, and it's hopefully in the future will be there, but UPS, as an example for shipping, you have to have an individual environment. It will not work well with an environment where you have multiple users. So another great option that AWS was unable to solve was something that Microsoft was able to solve because of the Azure Virtual Desktops. It was something that worked with the UPS as well. So that was just another example of a software product not really built for that type of an environment, but because of the capabilities and the enhancements that Microsoft made to the virtual desktop experience, this was now something that was possible for the client. Overall, the client has been extremely pleased with the environment, the added security benefits that they gained with Azure Virtual Desktop was also something that was a benefit to them. Microsoft's Azure Virtual Desktop has a very high built-in layer of security where you don't necessarily get that when you're building a brand new environment with just Microsoft's typical gateway for the RDS, connection brokers, multi-factor authentication, and other security that you would put in. Azure has this built in by default. So it gave some additional capabilities that were very well received by the client. That's it. If you have any kind of an opportunity where you need to move from an environment in the cloud to another environment in the cloud, it's something that Baroan Technologies has done several times with several clients very successfully, and it's certainly something that we can help you. If you'd like to talk about what the options are and what may be a good fit for your company, please give us a call. Check us out on our website or feel free to reach out direct via telephone. Thank you.